स्क्रीन शेयर ऑफ कर दो। अच्छा ठीक है, छोड़ दो।
बोल ले।
Hello guys, good evening. Thank you for joining us today. I am Ritvik Ganguly, Secretary of Coding Club, and I have with us today Adit Jain, the open source head of our club, and we'll be giving you a brief idea about the open source culture that we are trying to develop in our campus through various events and various events, competitions, and some such sessions that we plan to do. So today we'll be mainly giving you a brief idea of what open source is and how you can contribute to it. And later on, we might organize some other sessions too, which will be telling you about in a in the next few minutes. Over to you, Adit.
Thank you, Ritvik, for that introduction. Can you confirm that you can see my screen?
Right. Yeah, it's presenting. Yeah.
Okay, so hello everyone. So this is mainly an introduction to an open. Wait a second. I'm muting you, Ritvik, because there's an echo coming. Okay. So yeah, this is basically an introduction to open source culture and open source development. Uh, I have I have personally and the members at club also have received a lot of requests from different people in the campus who have asked what is open source and how do they get started with open source. It's a little unconventional, and I think the session would be helpful in that sense. So let's directly dive into what we'll be discussing today. This is going to be mostly a short talk. We'll be having mainly discussing four things. Firstly, why open source, then how to get started, then what are the initiatives taken by our club, and in general what are the initiatives going on around the world, then a short word on GSOC. So these are the 4 points that we'll be discussing. Uh, you are free to ask the questions on the chat box or on the questions box. This AirMeet platform does not support unmuting, so really sorry about that. Okay, and feel free to stop me if you have any question, or you can just ask them in the chat box. We want to keep this interactive. Okay, so let's start with the question, why open source? Uh, a lot of you must have heard this term open source. This has really become a popular term right now, much like machine learning, artificial intelligence. So what is open source and why open source in the first place? So, well, what is the difference between open source and closed source? Why are companies switching towards the open source, or why is the trend shifting towards open source? And finally, why should you join, or what's in it for you? So basically these are the three questions that we'll be answering today. Let's move on to directly to the first question, which is open source versus closed source. So what is open source in comparison to the closed source? So closed source software is basically the software that I think most of you have been using, but it's not entirely purely closed source that everything has been developed from scratch. It is based on open source software. So before I tell you the differences, let me give you a couple of examples for open source and for closed source. So for open source, I don't know how many of you use this, but a lot of people switch to Linux or Ubuntu when they come to campus, and then they start using Ubuntu. I mean, I'm sure 95% of you must be using at least Chrome, Edge, or Mozilla Firefox right now. All of them are based on open source web browsers, which is Chromium, Mozilla Firefox, and then Edge again is now based on Chromium. So this is one open source software that you all use. Android also is an open source software, which I think a lot of us have these days. Closed source software, on the other hand, iOS is a good example of closed source software, and Apple, I think almost all of the softwares that Apple creates are closed source. So let's discuss the parameters, I mean the point of differences between open source and closed source. So from a cost perspective, if you are buying the software as a customer, open source software is generally free to use and even distribute. So you can download Ubuntu and you can share it with your friends without any legal hassle. But for closed source software, this is not the case. Say Windows, you have to buy Windows, or else you would have to download a pirated version of Windows, which is illegal. But there's no such case in the case of open source. So the cost factor, open source is free. I'll be discussing a little bit more upon what exactly is the free component of open source and is there a cost attached to it or not. But we'll dive into that a little bit later. About security, so open source is secure in one sense because it is readily available for everyone to test. So it's a software, you can easily look at the source code of the software, how the software is created, what all are the what all are the vulnerabilities in the software. So you can test it easily and thereby make it more secure. So it's a secure software. But on the hand, closed source is also secure. There's a lot of testing, a lot of money that is being pushed into closed source development. So Apple pushes a lot into privacy and security. But again, it depends only on Apple. So no one else can test Apple software. There is no Apple can decide to get its software audited, but you can't just go and say, hey, I'm your customer, can I test your software? So there's less transparency in case of closed source software. Then user experience. In case of open source is created by people from different backgrounds, from different parts of the world. It's not created by people from the same company or same group. So open source software is really captures the different perspectives of people, and therefore making it a more user friendly or user experience based software. Also, you can report bugs easily on open source software, so you can even the customers improve the software. It's not only the company that improves the software. But on the other hand, the closed source software, they usually depend on their in-house testing or A/B testing, if you would have heard. So they try out different features and they test it, and then they come up with the software. Say Adobe has many closed source software, Photoshop and other things like Premiere Pro. But these softwares are rarely tested by Adobe's end. You can report the bug, and there are bug reports generated, but they are solved and they are analyzed by the company only. No other person does that. So the user experience is good, but it's not really the best that it can be. Lastly, from now, most of you I think are more into open source development than using open source software. So I think the fourth point is actually very critical for us because it's about source code reusability. So you can reuse the source code of an open source software any which way you want. So most of us today say use I don't know how many of you have used created a product in Django, but a lot of sites today are based on Django. So and what people do is they don't just use Django, they modify it in some way that they want, and then they create a project of their own, or they create libraries of their own. So that is one example of a open source software. One other example would be, I don't know how many of you have heard of the name TensorFlow. So TensorFlow is a machine learning library which is written in Python, and it's open source. So a lot of libraries have come up which are based on TensorFlow, and a lot of universities or a lot of corporations now rely on TensorFlow because they feel that source code is easily available, that I can easily improve it, and I can easily modify it to my own need. So that is one thing that why open source software is in such huge demand. Unfortunately, for the case of closed source software, there is no such reusability case. Well, these are, I know because this is an open source presentation, we have highlighted the points of open source in a positive light, but that might not be the case because for an open source software, closed source software has its own benefits. So you have a dedicated support team which has, say, 24 hours of maximum time within which they will respond to your queries for a closed source software. And there are some other benefits. But from a learning perspective, from a contributing perspective, from even a usability perspective. So I try to use almost all my softwares that I use are open source. And I try to use them because I have a sense that no other company is accessing my data and things like that. Well, that is a personal perspective. So that was the difference between open source and closed source. Let's move on to, what companies are there or what companies are shifting in this space. So almost all the major giants, say Google, Facebook, Microsoft, all of them have heavily invested in open source libraries, in open source software, in open source products. So I don't know, for Google, say the best example I gave was TensorFlow. So TensorFlow is an open source machine learning library. Facebook, I don't know how many of you have developed this, but React is a library developed by Facebook. For Microsoft, I have a very simple example. I use it. I think all of you must have come across it. There's a software called Visual Studio Code. So it became popular in, I think, 2016-17. But it's an open source software, and I was shocked that such a great piece of software is open source. So that is the power of open source, and you can see the improvements that they have brought in Visual Studio Code in the last, say, 12 months have been humongous, and that has been because of the power of open source and because of the power of contribution, which we'll discuss about in a little bit. So that is these are the three companies, but there are a lot of other giants. So Mozilla is one of the biggest open source companies out there. So these companies are for-profit companies, but there are non-for-profit companies also which heavily are based on or create open source softwares. So that is one thing. Well, okay, so this is the reason. Now, I mean, okay, this is about, you know, making an impact in the world and everything, and open source software is better, blah blah blah. But why should you contribute to open source software? I mean, why is it important for you as a person, as a developer, as a student, to contribute to open source software and to learn about open source software? So the reason behind that is, well, from a learning perspective, there are three main reasons. You learn to collaborate. So all open source softwares are based on collaboration. If time permits, I'll give you an example of a very big, I'll show you a repository of very big open source projects. I just mentioned a couple of them, right? I'll show you how active they are and how collaborative they are. So that's one real good, I think, thing that you learn on how to collaborate. And at the end of the day, collaboration really matters if you're thinking about going into a computer science field, or if you're thinking about taking up software development, or even as a hobby. Collaboration is not just useful in coding sense, but in general, if any project you are doing in life, I think collaboration really matters. Second, how to communicate your doubts, how to communicate your fears, how to communicate your interest in doing something. All of these things are really important, which people usually learn when they enter the corporate world, but open source development gives a feel of that, I think, a little bit earlier and in a very friendly environment. So the environment of almost all open source organizations and repositories are very friendly. Thirdly, you get to deploy real world projects. So, you don't. I didn't have when I was first working on my first open source project. So it was a very big browser engine, and I learned how to actually run a browser engine from terminal. So that was a small thing that I learned. But a lot of other things you actually learn how to scale things or how to actually test things out, and you get to, whatever changes you make into the source code, that actually ends up in the actual product. So if, say, there's a bug on Chromium that is being floated, and you try to solve it and you solve it, and at the end of the day, 6 or 3 months later, that comes into a release, and you see that feature being deployed and you use the product. So that gives a sense of pride to you. Well, that's about learnings, but also on a materialistic scale, what will you gain? So the first thing that you will gain is experience, and actual experience that you can write in wherever you want, or you can tell people about, or you can talk to people about experience. So I'll talk about this point later in the GSOC part of our presentation, but that is about experience. Secondly, you get to make a lot of contacts with people. So you get to create different contacts with mentors or people who are actually struggling like you, or people who have experience in that software, in that language, or people with similar interests. So you get to build your contacts, and you get to contact people, and you get to know how they solve their problems, and you will get to learn from them. So that's really is a very good feedback loop. Thirdly, you gain purpose. So open source software, most of them have a very strong purpose associated with them. And once you get developing into them, and once you are like 3 to 4 months into developing open source software, you start getting a feel of it. You start associating with that purpose of helping people out, of making software that, ease people's lives. So that purpose is also one thing that you gain on a materialistic scale. Okay, so that's about the whys of the things. Now the bigger question is, how do you get started? If you really, agree with my whys, the next logical question should be that how do I get into this field? How do I get inside this particular open source development? And that's a very logical question that anyone has. But before that, what are the prerequisites? Before starting anything, before joining anything, there must be some set of prerequisites that you need to fulfill. Luckily, in case of open source development, there are not many prerequisites. There are a couple of prerequisites that you should know how to, to get basic Git, I guess, but not much. It's not like you need to know, dynamic programming, or you need to have a lot of experience in competitive programming, or you need to have experience deploying machine learning algorithm. Open source software development is based on learning on the fly. So you need to learn what you need to deploy. I mean, what you need to develop. So you need to learn about the things that you actually are going to implement in the code. So for example, if you are implementing a new say function in the Chrome engine, and you want to learn it, you want to learn, and for doing that you need to learn C++ or a part of C++ or a part of say STL. So you need to look it up and you need to understand that this is what exactly I need, and let me implement this. So that's what you will implement. Second example would be, say you want to implement a machine learning algorithm on TensorFlow. You don't know much machine learning before, you don't have done that many courses on it, but when you are actually implementing, you would have to read papers on that particular algorithm. You would have to understand how do you optimize this algorithm from a computational perspective. How do you bring the time complexity to a reduced time? So all that questions, but you won't need to do that before you take the task. You can do that very much when you are solving the task. So the prerequisites are none, and nobody asks you. If you ask them, hey, I want to solve this bug, nobody would ask you, okay, give me your resume and then you may solve the bug. No, never. I have not seen this happening, and this is actually never the case. If you say that I want to solve this bug, they will say happily yes, you take it, you solve it, and you ask for any help from us that you need. That's what they do. Okay, so that's about the prerequisites. But now about the actual steps of how you get started. So you should set up Git. There's also a software called Mercurium, which some projects use, but not a lot. So Git is the first choice that you should do, and maybe then move on to different kinds of version control systems. So what is Git? I don't know how many of you know Git. Well, maybe you can, okay, you can raise your hands if you know Git, so that I know, I have an idea of how deep we should go into it. Okay, I see 6 raised hands. Anybody else in the audience know what Git is? I see 10 raised hands. That's great. Okay, I think about 10 people know Git, I think, from a crowd of, I think, a lot of people are here now. That's actually good. So I think Git is a software which helps people collaborate. So I hope everyone has used Google Doc. So Google Doc is a collaboration software for writing, right? But Git is the same thing for writing code. So Git is a software which helps two people write code together on different files or on same file, and it has its own set of complexity. So there is a learning curve to Git, but initially there's a less learning curve, but when you get into the complexities, it is a little bit. But it's definitely a very good software, actually a very necessary software in today's time, because since everything is going remote and remote development is being focused on, Git is more useful than anything. And even if places, where there is actually in place development where you go and develop, there also they develop Git repositories. So you should set up Git. I will send a link at the end of the presentation which will help you get around with Git. It would take 20 minutes or so to learn the basics of Git. Create a demo and a GitHub account. So there are a lot of places you can host your Git repos on. GitHub is the most preferred one. It's the biggest one actually. So that's why. You create a demo repo and you can clone it and get started with Git. So I'll send you a tutorial which is of 20 minutes. It's an interactive tutorial, so you need to type in things and you need to create things. But yeah, so that would do it. So once you are familiar with the basics of Git, very basics, we'll have a session to go deep into it. You can dive straight into open source development. I mean, there's not really much left there. You don't need to know a programming language as such. If you know basic C and basic, functional control structures, say if, for, else, and things like different data structures of your language, I think that is fine enough. You can learn everything on the go. Even you can learn a new language. So there are a lot of languages being used in softwares that you might not know, but you can easily learn them and you can pick them up as you go. So I will go on to tell you what are the different sites you can go on for good first issues. But thing is, so how does open source development work? There is a bug, people solve it, it gets deployed in the product, and it's a loop. A bug necessarily not might be a mistake in the software, it can also be an addition to the feature set. So you can add a feature, you can remove a redundant feature, you can actually fix some problem with the software, or you can just document it. Anything can be a bug. So all these bugs can be fixed easily by using, not easily, but they can be fixed, I think, reasonably in a reasonable period of time. And I'll dive into how do you get your first bug, but you need to get a bug, and you need to claim it, and you need to communicate. So communication means you need to get help for how do you get started with the bug. You need to tell them your first steps. Hey, I'm taking to solve this bug, I'm doing this, this, and this. Is this okay, or should I do something else? Or
Yeah, there's a question.
okay,
If you can see and answer that.
yeah, wait a second. If we learn on the go, then okay, so Triman Kaur, that's actually a good question. So if we learn on the go, then won't it take a lot of time to fix? So you need, I'm not telling you need to learn all the programming basics. I think you should know that. And I think if you are in a university, I think year 1 or year 2, you get these basic courses which get you to learn, the basics of programming. But apart from that, you are very right. It does take a lot of time. I mean a lot. But I took 14 days when I first, I solved my first bug on open source, and it was in a completely different language on a very big project. So I was very happy after I did that. But yes, there was a learning curve. So I had to read documentation. I had to do things. It was a little tough. No, so that's never the case. So there, people are actually you don't select or pick people. So I was going to that. So you have to claim a bug. So once you claim a bug, they will give you a period in which you have to update them about the bug. So you have to tell them, oh, what's your progress on the bug. If you don't update them, then they won't. Then they would, take you away from the bug and assign it to someone else. But if you keep updating them, hey, I'm learning this. I'm on this particular part. Hey, I'm on this particular part. They don't have a fixed time period, and they actually want people to learn. So they have a purpose of teaching people to code. Okay, so how do I find projects? That's my next slide, Swapnil. If you don't mind, I'll try to answer that in the next slide. But I think everyone is clear on this point. You have to claim the bug, and then you have to communicate. Communication is very important in open source software. Since you don't know that person, you have to communicate your thoughts, your ideas, your steps, your current progress in a very clear and systematic manner. And one thing that you always have to remember, it's a principle that you never ask to ask. So don't go like, hey, I want to ask a question. Just ask that question. They won't mind. They definitely love taking up questions, and there are a lot of forums you can go on. I will tell you if you have questions. But let's move on to the next slide, and I think Swapnil's question would be answered. So what are the different channels to get new projects or solving bugs, or finding new things to solve things? So here's a list of things. You can go on the internet and you can just search for what are some good first open source projects for beginners. There'll also be a list of projects you can work on, and yes, they will. Yeah, Ritvik is very right. We'll be providing today's slide, so you can click on these links. These are all hyperlinks, so you can click on them. And this blog especially is a very good blog. These mentored bugs is a very good site because this is by Mozilla, and they mentor you for, the bug that they are assigning you. There will be a mentor assigned to each person. So that is one good thing. Then all these up for grabs is actually a little bit more advanced. So it's a channel where you can see all the different bugs. So there might be some complicated bugs here, but otherwise first timers only, awesome for beginners, open hatch, good first bugs, mentored bugs, bugs ahoy. These are all websites where you can see a list of bugs, and some of these websites say good first bugs have you can just ask them, you can give them the programming language you want to, you can give them the area you want to work in, and then they will find a bug for you. So that's actually a very good thing. Then again, you can, if you don't want to do this, if you just want to go random, you can just go to GitHub. GitHub is a very good indexing system based on labels, and you can search for these labels. So beginner, easy, start. So for every bug they float, I'll show you a sample GitHub repo at the end so that you can understand how the bugs are there. So they have these labels associated to each bug so that people can find them. So there are easy, medium, hard. So you can easily go on to the easy one, or to the bite size, to the trivial, to the new contributor. There are a lot of bugs on these particular issues. And obviously, if you click on these hyperlinks, you will directly be searching GitHub for that particular. So I've made it easy for you to search for that label. You just click on this, and you'll find that. Oh, sorry for that. Okay. That are all the channels. I think that answers your question, Swapnil. If they did not, then please repost your question. Maybe I understood the question. In the wrong way. Okay. Okay. So go to these websites, find a bug to solve, and then solve them. Try to solve them. It will be tough in the beginning. So I had this fresher about say 2 months ago who came to me and said that I want to start contributing. I don't know. I invited him today to tell you something. I don't think he's here. But anyway, so he did that, and after he came after a month or so, and he said that, hey Bia, I started working on this, and I've started solving bugs, and then once he started solving bugs, he just got the feel of it, and now he's solving like a bug in 1 week or so. So he's really picking up things. So once you get a hang of it, you really start liking, and it's a really good process. You're developing at the end of it. You're learning new things. What else do you want? Okay. So that are the different channels where you can learn from. Lastly, on the slide in how to explore open source, we have, explore new ways. So sit with a friend and or start exploring with a friend and start contributing to the same bug. You can do that, very well do that. Or you can, just start your own open source project on something and then start categorizing bugs and floating them for people to explore, for people to understand. You can also, make groups and discuss bugs, discuss programming. If you need any help from the coding club of IIT Guwahati, I will more than be, we are also taking up initiatives, and that is our next thing. But we'll be more than happy to accommodate your needs and to understand how we can build an open source culture. So the main goal of open source culture is to just help each other. Okay, Mayur Samani has, yeah, that is actually a very good question, Mayur Samani, because a large, so that's a very specific question, and if you don't mind, I'll just, okay, I will just mark it because I'll answer this at the end, because this is a very specific and this is a very useful question that people have. I'll definitely answer this, but at the end of the presentation, because it would break the flow and it might get into a detailed discussion. But yeah, that is a very good question and I'll answer it. So as I was saying about some new ways, lastly I was mentioning, so we can make groups, we can discuss what is the best, web and app or contributing to. I have asked this, I've been asked this question many times, what is the best, MLAI, web app dev or contributing to open source? Well, I don't know about web app dev or MLDI, which is the better one, but I know this, you can do web app dev and MLAI while contributing to open source. So you can contribute to open source, to projects which use web or app development, which use system security, which use machine learning, and you can contribute to them and you can understand how these things work. So it's not either or, you can actually do open source while doing these technologies. So open source is not, open source development is not a third category in itself, it's a kind of development. It's a way to develop things. So closed source development is one, open source development is other. You can develop all kinds of app if you want. We can reinforce our learning of ML by contributing to open source. Yes, Raymond Kaur, you are actually right in saying that. So you can actually reinforce your learning of programming, MLAI while learning new things. So yeah, so my last point of some new ways was that you can make groups, you can discuss bugs, you can discuss new programming problems or anything else, and that would be a good way to learn actually. Okay, so I think that is about my part. I was here to motivate you on the open source development and how to get into it. We'll definitely answer some questions at the end. But before that, I would like to hand over to Ritvik to take over he'll explain what the coding club is actually doing. We are actually initiating a lot of new things this year. So Ritvik, you might, yeah.
Thanks, Adit. That was a really good introduction about the open source culture that we're trying to develop in the institution right now. So in the past few years, like in my 2 years at IIT Guwahati, I have noticed that competitive coding culture, the MLAI culture has seen a lot of growth in these past 2 years where I have been. But the one thing I have seen lacking is that there's not a lot of talk about how to contribute to open source or how to participate in these kinds of competitions. Like there are a few people, there are always people who participate in these kinds of things on their own, but there's not a dedicated community in it, like Adit said. And that's what our motivation, that's what my primary motivation was when I became the secretary of coding club, that I want to develop the open source culture and and start a new field. Like as I said in the chat box, open source does not necessarily mean it's entirely different field as web app development or competitive programming or machine learning or AI. It's basically a technique, or should I say, for lack of better word, a technique to contribute to all kinds of software that are available on the net. It will use website, it will use app, it will of course use concepts of machine learning and artificial intelligence as well. So it's a wide range, and it's not exactly a field in its own, but it encompasses everything that we know as coding, that we know naturally as coding is. So some of the initiatives that we are trying to take up this year are, of course, GSOC talks. We have held these in the past as well for upcoming first freshers, and also for people who are in the second, or third, or fourth years but are interested in participating in this competition. We invite people who have already qualified in the GSOC past years, and ask them to they can also mentor us. So we hold such kind of talks. Apart from that, there is also a session on bug compilation that Adit has come up with this year. It will be a very innovative thing this time, in the way that we'll be holding weekly sessions where we'll be having discussion sessions about specific bugs. Like we'll be taking up specific bugs, and then we'll be trying to solve them, not individually but in a group. We'll be having discussions, because only through discussions will there be a possibility or opportunity for collaboration and improvement of the culture. So that is one initiative that we are willing to take. The last thing is that, not last but not the least, I don't know how many of you have heard about Hacktoberfest, but this is one competition that I came across last year, actually, from a friend of mine. He introduced me to this. This is basically some of you might have heard about Oktoberfest, right? It's a festival that goes on throughout the month of October in the European countries. So modeled on that, Hacktoberfest is an open source competition, not competition, I would say. It's kind of a celebration of open source culture that goes on through the month of October, starts from 1st October and ends with 31st October, 11:59
You can
p.m.
also help me
So
let
it's
people
basically goes on with
yeah.
Oktoberfest, and that's why the name.
Okay.
So what happens
hopefully you
here
can
is
see my Slack right now.
you can contribute to every
Okay.
possible public
Just 1
repository
second, let me make sure
available
that
on GitHub.
nothing unwanted
It's
pops up.
GitHub specific. There's
Okay.
no other
So this is
version
our
control
exhibit
system you can.
document from 2 weeks ago. And so we have
If
5
you can
basic things. We
contribute,
have
like
our
even a small pull
in the
request
first section,
to
we
a
want to
public
show different.
repository
We
available
want to
on the
basically show
GitHub,
differences in composition across
ranging
different cities.
from, suppose,
Composition in
small
contacts and
repository like
composition
an
in
introductory repository.
comorbidities,
You
composition
can
in
contribute to a README
work
file.
from home.
It can
Those
be
are
as
sort of,
small as that,
these
or
are
it
all
can be
summary
as big
statistics
as an
and
organization repository, which
some of the
Adit might
ideas we
show
have
at the end.
for what to
An
include
example of a big
are for
repository where
contacts, average degree,
the
eigenvalues, mean number
activity
of
is
contacts greater than some
in the
number,
range of
fraction of
around
encounters
1,000 to
at work with
2,000
old
per
people,
week.
etc.
Like major organizations
So
which publish the
the
repositories
point
on the
here is to
open
show,
source
before you say anything about
GitHub,
the virus,
they
just how do
have a
these cities
huge amount
differ
of
and how
activity
they
that's
look.
going on. Because
The
see,
second exhibit, which we should talk
people
about a little
don't
bit more, is how to
contribute
explain what
to
our model
public
does
repositories
in terms of contacts. How
after
does it actually
belonging to a
operate on the context? And there
organization
we
or
want to
stuff.
show some
People from
confirmation
all over the world
of
contribute. So
these contact
you can
matrices with
just
different policies
imagine
and
how the
something
extent
like the figure that we had on our website. Let's talk about it later. Figure 3 in Exhibit 3, we wanted to talk about the healthcare data,
I don't know.
data, but especially the
Adit
healthcare data, and really emphasize that first of all we have really awesome data,
open source repository
but
like
also to
Linux or
show how
maybe
this is going
Ubuntu
to
or
be
maybe
how this might be
LibreOffice
important.
will have contributions on pull request in the range of suppose lakhs or millions maybe.
Yes.
So that's the range of it. So in Hacktoberfest, you can contribute to anything, like any public repository available on GitHub.
And
Each
to show the direct
contribution, each
relationship
valid pull
between
request counts,
comorbidities
and the details will be available on the
Is that
Hacktoberfest
roughly
website.
correct?
Adit, if you
We'll
can
come
please
back to it.
open the
Okay.
website
Then
and
in the
screen
fourth
share, it will be
in the fourth
better.
exhibit, we
just a
want to
second.
show. Suppose that you had just.
And then I'll be explaining what the initiative we are trying to take this time.
So Hacktoberfest website, do you want to show, or do you want to show the GitHub?
Yeah. No. Hacktoberfest website first of all.
Okay.
Somebody has already actually given a link.
Yeah, actually they can also visit the link. Can you see the sharing screen sharing?
Yeah, it's loading actually. Yeah, it's screen sharing. So see, so as it is saying, it's coming soon. It will start right like there's a counter as well. Yeah, so there's a counter as well at the top. It will start at 12 a.m. Right on 1st October. So one pull request. This is the thing that I took and in the post as well. Open source is changing the world. One pull. This is a beautiful quote actually. Every single pull request counts as long as it is a valid one and not trivial thing. If it is approved by the owner of the repository, it will count towards your Hacktoberfest participation. So what the best thing about this is, if you make 4 valid pull requests, you will get exclusive swags from Hacktoberfest and DigitalOcean. The swags include T-shirts and stickers and those kinds of things. So this can we send pull request on any ordinary day? Yeah. See, Hacktoberfest is basically a competition. Nothing else is means it's nothing different on in that respect. You can send a pull request every time, anytime, like throughout the year, throughout 24/7, into 365, anytime. Yeah, as Aryan says, you get T-shirts during Hacktoberfest, and those T-shirts are really good. I'm wearing one right now, but I don't. It's okay. Yeah. So that's what Hacktoberfest does, and it's a DigitalOcean initiative.
Interesting
What
option.
we are
So that would allow us to do those comparisons.
So I think Hambi, Matteo, and Cody, null output, that's our logical order. Chicago, New York, wait, sorry, what?
And
yeah, Chicago, New York, Kansas City, Sacramento.
Although those projects are close to
give me 1 second to set up, and then I will.
There are always
yeah. This one didn't even need to be annotated. I think it was.
You mean Chicago versus Kansas City? I thought those were two cities that have very similar
you
content
would know
matrices.
that there are always bugs with 19.04 and sometimes in 20.04 as well. So right now 18.04 is a very stable version of Ubuntu, but there are always people working on it so that the later versions are also becoming like free. So what Hacktoberfest is, so what coding club we are planning to do is, although the projects we have developed are able to be deployed on the net, but we want that more features are added, or if you discover any bugs, you contribute to it. So we'll be making our own repositories, projects developed by club members over the years, public, and we'll be keeping a count on the pull requests specifically to our websites, to our projects. Like you can of course participate in Hacktoberfest on your own, like, and contribute to public repositories all over the GitHub. But what we will be doing in our own competition is we'll be keeping a track of the pull requests that are made to our own repositories, and at the end of the competition, like at the end of the Hacktoberfest, we'll be releasing our own rewards, maybe certificates or something else. We'll be releasing our own rewards, and those certificates will be very valuable because we are trying to collaborate with other IITs and Google Developer Society. If someone has heard about that. And if that collaboration is successful, those certificates will carry immense value. So apart from like participating in Hacktoberfest on a global scale, we want you to contribute to the projects that we are releasing, so that you can participate in the coding club's Hacktober as well. And we'll be releasing the leaderboard at the end, and we'll be releasing certificates as well. So that's about the initiatives that we're planning to launch this year. This Since this is the first means beginning year which we are trying to do, there will of course be room for improvement, and we will be expecting that you guys will be coming up with new ways to improve our coding culture, and will of course be receptive towards those ideas. And as Adit said, uh, we are here always to means advise you on how to get started and how to contribute, and like go ahead with this stuff. And lastly, we'll be holding a Git session, preferably this Saturday or Sunday. We'll be releasing the club post from the club page as well. In that, we'll be talking about Git in details and how to make pull requests and how to accept those pull requests if you are a owner of a repository. Yeah, that's about it. Uh, I'll give it over to you, Adit. Thank you.
Thank you, Ritvik. That was definitely a good brief into our initiatives that we have taken as a club, and we'll be taking actually. I'm excited about the Hacktoberfest because there's a lot of collaboration that's going around it. But okay, so that I think Ritvik said that we'll be having a session on Git. So any doubts you can ask there, and you can have it's a hand-on session. So we'll be, I mean, you can download Git and you can actually experience it. Ubuntu is preferred, but yeah, Windows will work too. We'll talk about that in the Git session. But let's talk about the GSOC actually. So we'll be having separate GSOC talks, but because open source is mentioned and a lot of people actually have GSOC as their motive to start exploring open source. So what is GSOC? GSOC is a program by Google. It's called Google Summer of Code, where companies like, I mean, you should definitely go and check the Summer of Code website. I'm sending you the link, but you should definitely go and check out the different organizations that are there. There are actually, I think, 200 different organizations and projects, and they are definitely very, very good actually. So this is the link I shared. So there's a lot of exposure. Every project has some real world problems. They have mentors. So what you have to do is you have to select some projects. You can submit up to 3 proposals, and if your proposal gets accepted, you get to work on that project, on that problem with that mentor in the duration of the next summer. So now the application process starts in February, January, but you can develop relations right now. So you get to actually develop it, say now from May to August, you get to develop some real problem which gets deployed. And so there's a money incentive also there. So I think they pay around 3 lakhs for the 3 months. I tried to actually, I submitted 2 proposals. Unfortunately, I did not get. So all the details are in Summer of Code, but we'll also be organizing a GSOC lesson. And when should you start? How to start a proposal? I think that's the technical part of it. But you should definitely start with contributing at least to one of the organizations that are mentioned on the site. So yeah, Hacktoberfest. Actually, I think you can. So you should participate in the Hacktoberfest, and then you can move on to the Summer of Code. You can start right now also. That's actually no problem when you start. But the formal process starts in February. But it's good if you get acquainted with the mentors and the people of the organization. You can explore different organizations actually. I think a couple of people get into GSOC from IITG. Yes, I think it depends on how many people apply. But yeah, I think they don't have a criteria on college, so that's really no correlation with IITG and number of people that get into GSOC. Total number of people that get into GSOC, that's around, I think, 3,000, because there are 200 organizations. Yeah, no, actually 1,000 is I think 1000 is around how many people get into GSOC. But yeah, so that's one thing. So your summer is sorted. That's the last point. I mean, your second year, it is like it is actually like an intern only. It's just remote. That's the only thing. College don't play a part. GSOC, I'm just telling you GSOC because this is something that you should read upon. Go through the website, attend our GSOC talks because this is a good program and it's available for everyone. There's actually no other criteria than your interest. And it's a very good way to, and even the preparation of GSOC. So I prepared my second semester for GSOC. I didn't get selected, but I learned a lot and I had experience that I could show other people. See, hey, I have worked in open source organizations. So that's actually a good thing. I mean, even preparing for it. And it's not very time intensive either. Anyways. Okay, so questions. Before I move on to any further questions, I have to answer one big question, one other question. I think Mayur Sayal asked a question. Sorry, Mayur Samnani. I'm sorry for your misspelling and sorry for answering you late. But your question was how to understand a large code base quickly. It's a major problem for me when I try to contribute to some organization. So that's a very valid question. I faced the same problem. The solution that I came up with was don't understand the whole code base. There's no point in understanding the whole code base. Even when you are working on a very big project in a company, 5 years down the line, you won't really get to understand the whole code base, right? Understand the part that plays a role in your bug. So discretize the project into different parts. So discretize, okay, this is my user interface. This is my connection with the internet. This is my connection with in the software. And then even compartmentalize that particular sections into different sections and try to identify what is the pain point of your bug. So where do you want to install a new feature or which feature is actually, misbehaving, and then work on that. Understand that small shell rather than understanding the whole base, because if you try to understand the whole code base, the only thing that will happen is you will end up being discouraged, and that is really a problem. So
yeah, if I could pitch in here, Adit mentioned, one of the main things about contributing to GSOC is collaborating. If you can't understand the whole code base, you might even take the help of others who have worked on the different parts of the code to give you a rough idea about what the other parts of the code does. Suppose there are 5 compartments, the code, 5 compartments of the code, and you are supposed to be working on one compartment, and that compartment is actually linking to some other compartment through some process. You can ask the people right there on the collaboration page. I think there will be some sort of forum where you can ask like who is working on this part of this project. They can actually help you understand that part without actually going into the code of that part. They can give you a brief idea about it, and then you can proceed with moving ahead with your own part. Don't try to understand the large code base, because it will be very, very discouraging, as Adit mentioned. Like, you'll be giving up after a day or two if you try and understand the whole code.
Kunal, I see your question, and moreover, whenever I am done with the code base and I run it, I don't understand how to go around the bugs. Yeah, they are pretty scary to take on. I completely understand. The first thing that I do is I draw up a plan of action about, if I could solve this, how I would solve this. So I am not sure if I could solve it, but say if I have had all the power in my hand, how would I solve this? And then I just post it on the thread, on the GitHub thread, say this is how I am going to go about it. It may not make any sense at all, but then again the mentors really help. They tell you, oh, I won't really do like that, you should do it like this, you should do it like that. So that is where communication comes in, and you should tell them. Don't be scared about it, and it will take a little bit time. It is, you are not developing something very easy, you are developing something which is very complex and a part of a very complex piece of software. So it's not supposed to be easy, it is not easy. So definitely just go on, ask questions, ask random questions. There are these IRC channels, so I'll just mention them. IRC channels of every single project, I think. If not IRC, then Gitter channels or Slack channels, or some medium they use, say Rocket Chat. So where they encourage participation, where they encourage questions. So you can ask anything at all. they won't mind, and as it is, you don't know them, so their minding also doesn't make a difference. So just be open, just ask questions. That my advice on that question. Okay, any other question from anyone else? You can post on the questions or on the chat. I think all the questions till now were really good. But if anyone else has a question, they can either raise their hand. If you raise your hand, I can also unmute you actually. I just saw that feature.
One more thing, like, don't get a structured plan first. Don't just jump into any repository available on GitHub and get started. Like as Adit mentioned, and we'll be sharing the presentation, of course. Get started with the first issues, and there means when I started with open source, I did not delve in much into it, but I like the first issue bugs actually very well. Like they will be very easy to decode actually. Like the first one I started, I remember they the first issue was just adding your name into the contributors file. That was a pull request. That was what I started with. I did not go into it much, but get a rough structure, then you'll feel as if you're progressing and not just getting stagnant at one point.
Yeah, definitely. I think a structure, in that sense, I would like to say that by structure, I think Ritvik meant, as we have already discussed, that you should start to understand what Git is, get the basics right, get started with your own demo repo, then dive into the good first issues. You can take up any organization. So now Triman asked how to decide an organization. You should decide an organization based on your interest first and foremost. Then you can think about other things, that how much is their acceptance rate in GSOC, etc., or actually but first the interest, then the culture. How active is that organization? If you are really interested in an organization and no one is replying there, then you should definitely not just go into it. So you should see how active they are, because the more active they are, the easier it would be for you. So that is good. How much Git is required for open source? So the basics, I mean, push. I'll just write this too. So we'll tell this in the Git. So not just for open source, Git is actually required for almost any project that you do today. So push, pull, clone. I'll just write in a line. Clone, commit, merge. Yeah, I think
if you feel these are tough, don't worry. We'll be actually covering in our Git session as well.
Yeah,
but if you could get an idea, it would be beneficial for you actually.
Yeah, because we actually in the Git session we'll be taking from the very basic, I think, Ritvik, right? So yeah. So there isn't any prerequisite on that either. Just a computer is what you need. But that is definitely a goal. But please, if you come to the Git, so most of time what happens is that it's left in installation. So just go through the installation process yourself, and we'll explain you the other basics, how to operate it, how to use it. The installation part, I think we'll be sharing the links of how to install and videos of how to install. That would be better. So yeah, that's.
I think like it's very easily available on the website.
Yeah, but a lot of Google, I think especially the people who use Windows have some problem sometimes installing. I know right now people have started using WSL and other things, so that might ease things.
We'll be sharing the links as well in along with the presentation. Manish, you have asked a very good question. Even if they're leveled beginners issue in GitHub, they seem to be extremely difficult in understanding. So this is one problem which I faced, and actually I'm sad to say that this discouraged me a lot. But what I would say is there are millions and millions of repositories on GitHub, and probably 10 to 20% of them will be labeling beginners issue as extremely difficult. Okay, so if you find one of the repositories as extremely difficult, move on to the next. Like, just don't give up. If you're planning to
or move on to the next good issue, good first issue. Just find something that you can solve, or actually even for a difficult issue, try for some time and then give up, because some problems might be difficult for you.
Don't give up directly.
Okay, I think if anyone has a question, they can raise their hand. Otherwise, we'll because it's already a little late. we can close today's session. But I think if it was useful for you, you can react similarly. If it was not, we'll definitely love feedback. So you can tell us on our, either personally to either of us, or you can, just message also in the chat box how we could improve this session better. But any other questions, feel free to ask them. Anyways, you can approach either of us or anyone from the coding club for any questions you have, right, Ritvik?
Exactly. Yeah. We are approachable. Like there might be a delay in answering, but that delay won't be more than 1 day. That I can assure you.
Yeah.
Feel free to approach anytime if you want. Thanks for the reacts. If there is any way to improve it, if you're not saying it right now, even personal messages will do. We're always welcome to reviews. For now, I think we can say good night and wrap this up.
I think a question.
Yeah, there's a question.
I can't see it. Can you see it? Oh, sort by time.
I am using.
No, it's not necessary. Git is there on Windows.
I personally use Windows because there are reasons I personally use Windows as well. Windows advantage is that you don't need to enter your password every time you commit and things like that. But there are advantages of using Git in Ubuntu as well.
Yeah, it's not necessary to switch for that software. Git is easily available on Windows as well.
Yeah. You can see on web, and if you face we'll of course be sharing the links for Windows installation as well. In Git, in Ubuntu, it's basically a single command for installing Git. It is very easy. And in Windows, actually, you need to install the software and Git bash. If you face try searching for it on the web. If you face any problem, we'll of course be sharing the links in a couple days.
Yeah, definitely. Any other question, you can post it. So there's a chat.
Aditya, you can explain advantage of using Ubuntu for Git.
I think, I've used it both on Git and now things have changed a little bit because Windows now has this Ubuntu shell also available. So you can almost do anything there too. But the reason is it's already installed on Ubuntu. There's no external installation required. Git is already there. It's easy to set up, and the terminal, there's only one terminal. There's no PowerShell or thing like that. So you can easily do that. Yeah, I think these are my reasons for Git, but actually I use Ubuntu for different set of reasons, so there's no much reason. I didn't shift to Ubuntu because of Git, if that's what you wanted to ask. Yeah, we will definitely share the PPT. I found Sublime Merge very useful to handle Git. It's a user, yeah, okay, great. Anmol, so Anmol has actually suggested an alternative, so there are a GUI also for Git.
There are actually various text editor softwares which directly handle Git and Git. Handle merge request and how to now how useful it is. Will we use it in the future? GitHub command line interface is available both on Windows and Ubuntu as well. Ubuntu is basically GitHub CLI. And on Windows, there is GitHub Bash, which acts as a CLI, and there is also GitHub GUI feature on Windows as well. I personally prefer GitHub CLI because the commands are very easy to remember and you get very accustomed to using them readily. For GitHub, except in case of handling merge request, I don't usually resort to GitHub GUI because it becomes a little difficult to see the structure, but there are always various alternatives. There are a lot of softwares that handle Git, but at the end